All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this panel that we have of interpreting the chivalric oath through DEIB in general, right? This is mostly supposed to be a very conversational back and forth panel between knights of the society from different kingdoms, and I'm very happy to be joined by several people who are very well known and well established luminaries of chivalry. So I'm very happy to be here and to chat with everyone. Uh, as a heads up, we will be having discussion questions already kind of pre-planned. So we've had some time to go back and forth and really focus on what we want to talk about. That being said, if anybody has an offshoot question or a question that we've not addressed that you want to see kind of explained further, definitely make sure to put it in the chat. I fully trust Joshua to help us moderate all of that stuff. So with any questions, make sure to put them in the chat. But that being said, let's introduce ourselves so that our guests know who we are. Who would like to begin?
I'll introduce myself real quick. Hi, I'm Helga. I'm from the West Kingdom. I've been a knight for 5 years now. I'm also a pelican and a royal peer. And I would like to say that I affectionately call myself Jess a student. That way she can continue to help me to be a DEI be advocate in the SCA.
I'm Duchess Hrafna. I was knighted in Anstiora in 2008, but I'm currently living in Antir, moved up here about a year ago. Happy to be here and amongst this very stellar panel.
I am Justin DeLeon. I am a knight from Antir. I've been in the SCA for a very long time. I started out in 1982 as a young boy in what was then the Kingdom of Atenvelt, in what is now the Kingdom of the Outlands. And I'm currently landed baron as well in Stromgard, which is Vancouver, Washington, basically a suburb of Portland, Oregon.
Awesome. And I'm Roberto de San Fernando. That's my short name. I have a very long Spanish name that we can talk about later. I've only recently been knighted, so I got knighted this past September 2023. I'm a little baby knight, so I'm very happy about it, very honored and very humbled about this whole process. And yeah, I've been very interested in DEI stuff ever since the office was created. I have a background in sociology, so I have this kind of academic approach to all of these things into the SCA. So it's really cool. It's been really cool to see how these worlds kind of combine, especially now that we're having this whole symposium, thanks to the Kingdom of Antir for hosting all of this. So let's get started with the questions. Let's start with the most basic and general question. Where does DEIB as a concept fit into your chivalric ideals? If people want to start, or I can start, whatever you prefer.
You want me to go first? I'll just
sure, yeah.
Put it up. So one of the things for me about just the concepts of chivalry and DEI and belonging as well, the central idea of chivalry was this concept of order in society, right? And that was really, if you look at what they were trying to achieve to some extent with the idea of codifying knighthood and all of these things, it was to prevent, the abuses that were being waged against society by certain members of the society. At least that was the perception, right? The clergy and various other authorities in society started changing the way people thought of themselves, or at least attempted to. And so when I look at the concepts of chivalry, the concepts of order within the organization, one of the things that I immediately am taken by is the idea that we have certain concepts to which we are beholden. The idea of the what's a good word? Basically the ideogrammatic nature of words like chivalry, which is to say that it's a word that has a meaning that transcends its specific dictionary definition, right? We attach concepts to the word based on the word itself, right? And so different people might approach it with different ideas, but the central function of the word includes concepts like honor and loyalty, and maybe if we're being more medieval, things like franchise and these sorts of concepts. And
what are known as the virtues, essentially.
Right, exactly, right. And these are the virtues that make up what we think of as a chivalric person's behavior. And with regards to members of the society, we come together with a lot of different life ways as you know, Americans, right, largely, and Europeans, and you know, there. But the thing is that as a result of the society from which we arise, right, there are inequities and inequalities built into the treatment of people, right? And so for me, it's always been very much about trying to champion the idea of opposing those policies and those behaviors that further those inequities and inequalities. And you know, for me, doing that through the idea of attempting to acknowledge the uniqueness that each person brings to a situation, and at the same time to treat them as a completely equal human being, right? Which is to say, to attempt to avoid the pitfalls and the problems that we confront on a daily basis that are the product of the culture from which we arise. And with regards to chivalry, again, one of the problems, of course, that we'll probably talk about later is, you know, there's a certain Europeanness to it. There's a certain chauvinism to it, right, conceptually. And so working to avoid those things, while at the same time saying, I'm not going to be colorblind, I'm not going to be gender blind, I'm not going to be blind to the particular things that someone brings to a conversation, but at the same time, I want to treat them as I would expect myself to be treated, right? To treat them as completely human, I guess. And so the oaths we swear, to me, reassert that value, right? The idea of protecting, you know, people, to be honest and faithful with the organization and the tenets that we hold as ideals. You know, that's a long explanation, but I mean, there's my starting point, I guess.
That's fair.
Yeah, I'll jump in from there. Yeah, and I think it's important to also note the concept of chivalry is something that has evolved over the centuries. You take the concept of what chivalry was back when it was originally, you know, codified, and then what compared to what it is now, not exactly the same kind of thing. And it's important to note that, because if you were trying to treat somebody from the chivalric virtues from, like, say, the 11th century, people would probably think you're a horrible monster. But according to our modern definition, to me, it really comes down to the function of the knight and the concept of chivalry around is really focused on the concept of justice and the protection of people who need support, is really what it comes down to. Modern day concepts of chivalry aren't there to protect the people who already have power and authority and strength. We're here to make sure that the folks who don't have that voice, who don't have the ability to speak up for themselves, to be able to flourish, to be who they are, to be not worried about being ostracized and punished for simply existing. And that's core to the concept for me.
Mm-hmm. You know, I actually agree with you a lot, Hrafna. Like, I was thinking about, as kind of we were getting to this day, I was wondering, like, all right, what are the virtues, I guess, that if I had to pick one virtue that was particularly insightful and important for me as a knight, like, I'm right there with you in terms of justice being one of them, right? I think justice is one of the virtues that really mitigates the rest, essentially, or how we apply ourselves, because, you know, prowess without justice can result in kind of a barbarism, right, or kind of an abuse, right? Or courage without justice is kind of just unmitigated, and so on and so on and so on and so forth. I do find it interesting too that as we examine the chivalry through the ages, Hrafna, you mentioned, you know, the 11th century. Justin, you were mentioning just chivalry as an effort to politically codify, you know, conduct for a warrior class, for lack of a better term, or for a very powerful, privileged class. It's interesting that regardless of, at least keeping it in European cultures for now, regardless of culture and time period, chivalry functions as a code of conduct, right? More than anything, like, there's, you know, you can compare notes and you can have different ideas and conflicting opinions, but always at every time, it's how do we make sure that we take this social class of people who have wealth and privilege and make sure that they are using it in a way that is beneficial to society, right? And, beneficial to society means something different when you're the Pope versus when you're the regent versus when, you're a lowly peasant. But, there's something there about an expectation of behavior. And I think that the oaths that we swear, which is something that I want to get to later, because I think all four of us might have different chivalric oaths.
Maybe.
The oaths that we swear kind of hold us to that, and there's this kind of important mental component that there is an investment emotionally, psychologically, physically, in making sure that we play these out as best we can. And human fallibility being what it is, we fail often, but the effort, and it's kind of like pursuing the Grail, right? To use a 13th century metaphor, you're never going to find the Grail, but the act of looking for it is always there, And that's, I think, DEIB is that. If we're going to use that metaphor, of DEIB is kind of like the Grail, right? Where we have all of these processes that we are kind of looking to deal with together and kind of address together, because change is slow and system and needs to be systemic. But there's that process, and that process is, I think, particularly important, right? And that's, I think, the chivalric virtue of, just the striving, the looking for it, the questing, the pursuit of justice is particularly important. Yeah, I don't know. What do you think, Helga?
So I'm going to take this on a slightly different path.
Yeah.
The chivalric ideals. We're in a society that it's actually a made up fantasy society. We're based off an idea of an idea of an idea, and this idea should be we should be the knights in our storybooks and everything else like that. So my chivalric ideals are, I want to be the knight that invites everybody else to also be that, no matter what their background is. I want to be the knight that makes sure that the other knights are called on their bullshit, and that we continue to adapt and grow and learn, especially as in the mundane culture, we've lost that barrier. The veil is gone between our mundane lives and our SCA lives. And so being the knight that can call people on it both mundanely and in the SCA, and continue to build bridges as well as face some of the more threatening aspects, that's the job of a knight. My job is to stand in the way and help both educate and block when needed. And that's, so it's that one thing is, I want to be the fantasy knight in the storybook. And I want to teach all my squires to be the fantasy knight in the storybook that makes it so everybody wants to be here. We're the front runners and the marketers of the SCA. We're the first people, we're the easiest to see. We're the loudest, and we're the most violent, which means that we have to be the most approachable, and we have to be the most educated. And so that's where all my chivalric ideals go to. It's not even in the actual manuscripts of what justice is. I'm looking at a modern day version of justice and trying to apply that while I'm wearing funny clothes and inviting everybody to be here with us, because I want to hit more people with sticks.
Right. It's a lot of fun.
It is.
Well, that makes sense. And I think one of the biggest things or biggest difficulties is being able to figure out that level of, all right, where are we gentle and where are we not, right? Because chivalry is a fighting peerage, right? Being a knight is a fighting peerage. That means we're accustomed to a level of violence, and it's a sport, and there's a consent level here, but ultimately we're all people who are comfortable aggressing upon other people and having other people aggress upon us. So how do we find that balance then of being able to, for example, be gentle with somebody when that's the proper course, versus saying, no, you need to stand down and sit down, shut up, and listen. So where do we find that balance then? After you.
It's actually understanding which knights are the tools for what the job is. No knight is going to be the perfect, or no member of the chivalry will be the perfect tool for every situation. Sometimes you need somebody that'll bully the bullies. I am 5'5", I'll fuck around and find out. I also have professional mediation training. I have a bunch of other training in this area, but also, because of my nature, I'm the person who can tell people sit the fuck down, or back off out of this fight, and I continue to stay in that area. But sometimes when we need a gentler hand, or somebody that's willing to walk somebody through their biases or anything else like that, I'm going to go find somebody else that has the bandwidth and has the knowledge that can sit with that person and not be like, I'm going to crush you into a small thing. And so knowing our strengths and having basically like a team on the chivalry. So when we're not capable of doing it, we can tap somebody else in and be like, hey, this situation is not, we don't need to like burden this person. This person needs to be educated, but I'm not in a place to educate them right now. I need help to make sure that this situation, we all grow out of this situation versus it turning into a war or turning into like a cultural rift of like, well, this person was just an asshole to me and I was just trying to learn. And that's really, really key, especially in the chivalry.
Yeah, and that's where the metaphor of the chain comes in real strongly, because it's not just one person, one link doing all of the work. We're all slightly different. In fact, I'm happy to be wearing a chain that's made up of different shaped links because we're all different. But in the end, we are an order that is there to do the work. And as everybody has said here, be the marketer, be the strong right arm, be the mediator, be the bulwark between right and wrong.
Makes sense. Justin, do you have any thoughts?
Oh, for me, I have a very compartmentalized view of the sort of violence that we engage in, right? And that is to say that when I engage in violence, it's very specifically on the field, right, or in practice, and outside of it, I guess I'm not exactly a different person, but I'm certainly not going to be someone who uses violence in a way to control or manipulate unless I'm absolutely forced to, right? And that would be defensive rather than anything else. There's, like Helga says, there's a time and place for being very forthright and being very direct and engaging with people who need that, right? Because there are people who simply will not respect language that is not very direct, I guess is the best way of saying it. I've had encounters with people when confronting issues where there were complaints about DEI, and in dealing with some people, you just have to say you need to stop. You need to look at exactly what you're doing here, and you need to understand who it is you're hurting, including yourself, right? And how it is that you're harming the larger society in your attempt to try to be resistant to these ideas, right? And so I mean, there is a time and place. For me, like I said, my violence is very compartmentalized.
Though it's interesting because one of the things that we learn I'm bringing in some mundane like knowledge here. One of the things that we learn in sociology is that violence is not necessarily physical. It can be also symbolic, right? The presence of an office, right, is just coercive in and of itself. So there is, and I'm not to refute your point, absolutely not. It's just to add more, I guess, of what everybody is saying. It's really impactful when it's somebody is saying something in defense of somebody who was marginalized, but it's much more impactful when a peer and a visible peer, because of all the peerages, we all have our regalia, we're all pretty noticeable, but the white belt is particularly shiny, like that's one of the first things that people who are new to the SCA look at, right? And being able to symbolically put that belt on and say, hey, that's a measure of symbolic violence that has been used for better and for worse, right? So being able to learn when to deploy it strategically, for lack of a better term, I think is really important. So that's really cool. It's really good.
Well, I mean, in the end, not to put it oversimplified, but violence is a tool just like anything else, just like words, just like a hammer, just like anything else. So, when's the proper when's the proper time to use any particular tool? That's always the trick. What's that old phrase? If the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Well, if the only thing you know is violence, guess what you're probably going to, lead with, right? So going back to Helga's point of knowing the right person for the right job is key. And that's why the order is stronger than the components that make it up.
Yeah. Well, now that we're on this tangent a little bit, I want to bring in a discussion question that Helga was the one that brought it up. So when we are knighted, I believe we get some variation across the kingdom of let this be the last blow you receive unanswered,
Hmm.
right? Yeah. So what does it mean for you? What does that phrase mean for you in the context of DEIB? Then go for it.
I'll
It's
pop it. Sorry,
it's
I'm
y'all's
so used
panel.
to
You don't have
raising
to
my
raise your hand.
hand to be like, I would like to go.
Yeah, no, go for it. Just go for it.
So the last blow unanswered. I love this, by the way. This is my favorite argument in the kingdom. Like, there has been more than one sit down and talk about this. Last blow unanswered is actually the base of all of my oath. It means that I need to be able to mediate situations. It means that I need to be willing to step in. It is actually the protection of people that cannot answer the blow. And it doesn't mean that I must answer in kind. So somebody slaps me does not mean that I need to slap them back. What it means is I need to take the time to make sure they're not going to do that to somebody else. That is the last blow unanswered to me. If I see somebody disrespects me, cool. Like, let's talk about it, because if you're doing it to me, you're going to do it to somebody else. And so like that's the thing, is I must address the situation, and I must address the situation with the best tools I have possible, or bring in somebody that can. You do not have to be the one that deals with that blow. You need to be the one that's willing to deal with the setup to handle the situation. And that's part of like that big peerage oath for me, is I don't get to walk away now. What I do is I don't have a peer to go run to, and that's not meant as a negative thing, is my peer is not there to protect me anymore. So if somebody slaps me in the face, like Havek, who is an ent of a human, would have been like, excuse me. Now it's my turn to make sure that if that happens to my student, I walk in to mitigate, or I deal with it, and deal with it in a way that betters the interaction, that stops the behavior, that addresses what's going on. And so last blow unanswered is I don't get to walk away anymore, and I must gain the tools. I must take the time as a peer to gain the tools to handle the situations in front of me.
Refusing to be a bystander, making sure that you are stepping in and, like you said, not necessarily being the one who's solving the problem themselves, but refusing to let it be unsolved. You know, refusing to let it stay there and continue to fester or be a problem or to hurt the individual or the group in question.
Yes, that.
Yeah. No, it's the moment of, I'm looking for an adult in the situation, and congratulations, you're the adult in the situation. Right.
Yeah, that actually was directly in line with what I was about to say, which is that
Right.
when you look at knighting, right, it's the transition to adulthood historically, right? They were knighting people who were 16. They were knighting people who were moving from one state to another, and in so doing, becoming an adult. And that's what it is, for example, for me, is just the idea of becoming that. But I'm now an adult. I don't have an excuse not to pay attention to these things and deal with them as an adult does, right? I can't. I not only should I not, but I functionally cannot any longer avoid the responsibility of being struck, so to speak. You know?
Right. It's interesting because when we are all, I think we're all in agreement, right, that the last blow unanswered, that means that we have to step up, we have to be the adult in the room, we have to do something. I find it interesting too, because it's easy to develop a public perception that the last blow unanswered means somebody gets struck either physically or symbolically, and it's now like, all right, it's game time, gloves are off. The question then is, where does tact come into play, right? Like, sometimes we don't need to call somebody out publicly. Sometimes we need to just bring them into a room quietly and be like, hey, man, this is what's going on. Like, we need to deal with this. Or sometimes this person needs to be put on blast. So I guess that's the question, right? Of where do we find that balance? And I think it goes back to the idea maybe of, finding the right person for the right job, right? Helga, I think you've developed a really helpful, like, callback, like right person for the right job, right? This is an order, not just one person. But unfortunately, as a result, one person is a representative of that order, right? So there's a lot of conflict there. So I guess that's the trick. Yeah, right.
Well, that's also where the concept of having like the court of chivalry can step in, because this might be a bigger problem than just one person can solve. So let's involve the larger order in assessing the situation and determining what's the best course of action.
That's true. So
I
yeah,
also, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
no, you first.
Oh, so I was also going to say that, another thing that we can also fall back on is just simply the 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 other virtues and ideals of the organizations, of the order of chivalry itself, right? The idea of prudence and temperance, and these other virtues that we talk about perhaps a little bit less, but genuinely are incredibly important, in dealing with existence, right? In a very real way, in a day-to-day, life. Like you said, you're not going to sit there and call everyone out, when they're necessarily behaving in a certain way. And that's the temperance and prudence that says, there's a right time for things. There's a right way to handle things. There's a right, there's a proper way to engage with people. And we can't just be, as we can't just be justice, right? We can't just be prowess. We can't just be these things. We must attempt to be all of these things. And I think, again, going back to adulthood, I think that really does hit it. It's like we have to acknowledge, all of these characteristics in ourselves and try to embody them to the extent that we can.
Right. And I think it's difficult too, because one of the issues, I guess, that we inevitably run into is that if we bring up this conversation, for example, with our siblings in chivalry, then all of a sudden there's definitely people who don't think the way we do, right? And who don't maybe uphold these ideas and maybe have ideas counter to what we're looking for. So then the tension becomes twofold, I guess. It's the problem, and then convincing or dealing with making sure that, like, hey, like, guys, this is actually a serious issue that we need to deal with. So there's a level of balance that we need to find somehow to be able to deal with problems and engage in the pursuit of what we're trying to achieve.
Well, that also kind of dovetails or butts up against the fact that as peers, just in general, and to be really honest, in my opinion, humans, it's our job to continually educate ourselves and be more aware of what's going on, because societies evolve. People theoretically get better. They grow over time. If someone refuses to change and say, well, this is the way it's always been, they're going to get left behind, and no one's going to listen to them. Same thing for organizations. If organizations don't change and evolve, if nations don't change and evolve, if society doesn't change and evolve, it dies out. Because like people like to quote, Darwin about the survival of the fittest. Survival of the fittest doesn't mean the strongest thing out there. It means the thing that is most adaptable to change. That is what Darwin was writing about. So if you don't change, if you don't grow, you don't learn, you become, I'm not going to say less useful, but it's up to all of us to continually improve and make sure that we understand as much as we can.
Right.
So on the subject real quick, on the call out versus call in, one of the things is assessing the level of harm being done in the situation. If the level of harm being done at that moment in time is extreme, get them out, call them out, get the situation handled. Because again, that goes to part of our nightly oath, defend. And so get that person out. And I don't care if that person's super pissed off at me. I will then go sit down with them later. If it's a subtle thing that you see, like a long-term behavior or anything else like that, a lot of the times that I've found, the knights want to be invited. And I'm talking about the chivalry very specifically here. So like at 12th night, we actually just recently, like, we had a back corner conversation where I have invited two knights that were really, really staunch on the I don't see gender on the field. And I'm like, we need to discuss this. I will bring you beer. You don't even have to talk. We're going to have a discussion about this because a couple other people want to talk to me about this. I'm going to invite you to come join and just listen if you want. Both of them showed up. And both of them walked away and were like, oh, I'm going to go do some assessment in my life. But the thing is, we didn't bring them there to make them the target. We just invited them to be there while I was discussing with people that had already approached me. And so that is a thing of like, that's the level where we have to dance that line of slowly but surely not making sure that while we're educating, we're not targeting people unless they want to be targeted. However, there's a subtle manipulation pattern of where like, hey, we're going to do this. Come join us. Come see if we can give you some new information and have you be a part of this. I guarantee 9 times out of 10, they'll walk away actually assessing that thing. And so they can continue to grow. And one of them has continuously messaged me since our 12th night to be like, hey, what can I read? Where do I need to go? How do I need to get better at this? And it's been fascinating to watch that happen. But level of damage, that's something that you need to assess in the moment, to where you can subtly pull somebody aside and be like, hey, this is not actually okay. Like, this is not an okay behavior. So it's not that big public call out. But if it's damaging at that moment in time, somebody's being racist, somebody's being super sexist, fuck them, burn them. By the way, I cuss a lot. I'm very sorry.
I'm a fan.
Yeah, so something that I strongly encourage people to, participate in is learning about the idea of how to step in situations, right? And what I mean by that is, take classes on things like bystander intervention. Be prepared mentally and psychologically to step in, right? To take that role that Araya is talking about, because it is not something that is done easily for everyone, right? And if it's not done properly and you're not mentally prepared for it, it can come off as passive, and it can even come off as excusing behavior, right? And mentally rehearsing, even preparing, what am I going to say if I see someone saying this? How do I want to interact with people in this situation? And being familiar with it, I think, is a very important step for everyone, especially I think for peers, because of our of the violence of our position, so to speak.
Well, and to that point also, if you see somebody else who you admire because they have those skills, go to them and ask. Say, hey,
absolutely.
Can I pick your brain for an hour? I saw how you handled the situation. You did a great job. Can I please tell me how you did that? And 9 times out of 10, people will be maybe not in the moment exactly, but they will happily sit down over a beer or whenever and teach you those skills, because again, as leaders, not necessarily just knights, but leaders in general, we need to be expected to lead on occasion, and that can be uncomfortable. It's not always standing out the front with the flag going, ha ha. Sometimes it's ugly, but we need to be prepared to do the work.
It's interesting too, because this fits really well with an actual nuanced understanding of evolution, which Hrafna, you mentioned that earlier. Communities or species that are likely to survive are ones who are very adaptive too, but also ones that can work in community. A species like ours are particularly really well designed for work in community, and no one person can do it alone. Therefore, and following that line, no one person can learn alone. So that means being able to have the courage and wherewithal to go, okay, maybe I don't know about this, or being willing to be invited in, or keeping that in mind and saying, all right, maybe one-to-one is maybe not going to get it, but if we're all doing this together in a low pressure environment, this can actually work. Community is actually a lot more influential than people realize. And that's something that we have the power to do explicitly. The Shiv are, because of our position, because of our privilege, we're the ones who can really create or destroy communities in a way that few people can. And that's particularly important to kind of keep in mind, right? Really quick, as a quick aside, I just want to for everybody in the room here, if anybody wants to start learning more and wants some reading material, I'm gonna put one title in the chat, in the general chat to everyone. It's a book written by one Bell Hooks from Kentucky, and the book is The Will to Change. That one, read it. That one's a really, really good one, and that's helped out a lot of people. Particularly deals with masculinity, patriarchy, heterosexism, all of this kind of stuff that we encounter in the society, because of course, a subculture is a reflection of the larger culture. So if you want one reading material, start there and go from there. Yeah. So actually, somebody mentioned earlier the idea of gender blindness, or Justin, I think it was you. Let's talk about that actually. So this idea that, like Helga was mentioning, I don't see gender on the list. What does that mean? What do you hear when you hear that as knights, when somebody tells you that?
I'd prefer when the gender minority fighters go before I talk about it. So
I'd say it's better, but it's not good. I mean, it's definitely better than someone who's, in this case, misogynistic, is going to go out and beat up on girls because they feel like they have the right to do so. So it's a step along the path, but it's not. We would like to bring people a little bit further on, because it's a much more nuanced conversation than just willfully self-imposed blindness is really what it comes down to. It kind of goes back to the whole point of okay, I choose not to see the plethora, the rainbow that's out there. I'm just gonna live in my own little box and deny that there's a problem in certain ways.
Yeah. Helga, thoughts?
You're about to put a quarter in me. So this is actually a bias that I had to get over. I was raised incredibly misogynistic. And so I internalized a lot of those behaviors. And then I came into the SCA with no other like female fighters really, besides like 2 other female knights in my kingdom. And it was very much so the boys' club. And so if you mimic the behavior, so it's just reinforcing those misogynistic things that I was raised in already. And if you reinforce those behaviors, you're taught literally to erase your own identity and gender to fit in and be accepted. You can take a hit, you're a tomboy, everything else like that. So I was really bad about this. Like, and so it was actually my now squire that called me on this because I was up talking about it. I'm like, I don't see gender on the field, blah, blah, blah. This is a whole bullshit concept. And she was like, you do not get to take away my identity. And I sat the fuck down.
Yeah.
And then did a bunch of self-education. The idea that there's no gender on the field automatically erases a person's identity and their ability to explain where they're at in their journey, because they must go to the male side because it defaults male and it defaults white heterosexual male on the field. And this is unfair because it doesn't allow us to look at barriers. It doesn't allow us to look at mostly social barriers, because like that's actually the thing, is everybody deals with different social barriers and how they're treated on the field. And if I take away their gender and automatically in my brain make them a white heterosexual male, I cannot address those barriers in real time. And I can't discuss with them where they're at or what they even perceive as like a problem getting in there. And that is not okay. Also, frankly, I like that I'm a woman. Like, I'm really, really cool with it. Like, why would I erase my own identity on the field? Because somebody will come up and relate to me. If I'm part of the problem there, like they can't come to me and say, hey, as a woman, I have a question. And then if I turn around and say, well, I don't see gender on the field, they now cannot approach me. I have erased that connection. And so that is something that, like, as I said, I still have to sit down with that one. Like, because I was part of the problem.
In the end,
like,
it denies the
like
lived
the
experiences of other folks.
Yeah. And that's the last thing I want to do. And so gender erasure on the field is actually a really bad concept. Like it's really bad. It's like erasing somebody's race, somebody's religion, everything else like that. We actually have a tournament, by the way, in the West that is fought on Sunday, because originally one of our I can't actually remember which religion, and I feel really bad about it. Their day is Saturday, not Sunday. And so they actually developed one of our royal tournaments around it, so that group of fighters could fight on Sunday for this tournament and actually reign.
Yeah.
And so
would that be Judaism?
Probably could be.
I think so. And like I feel bad that I don't actually know, but I know that the history of why we fight that on Sunday. And people have tried to change it over the years. We're like, nope, because this gives us access. Like this gives a certain subset of our culture, like our group in the West, access to fighting in a royal tournament and being royal. And so that is something that I try to pay attention to all the time, is we cannot erase identity on the field and continue to call ourselves inclusive.
Yeah, there's a strong correlation into, like, people who are differently abled. So, we have a lot of outdoor events, so that can be a problem for folks who are like, might be in a wheelchair or have other mobility issues. We like, oh well, it's flat ground, it should be fine. Well, yeah, it's flat ground, but what if it rains and there's mud everywhere? Okay, well, if you're in a wheelchair, that's going to keep you from participating. So I know in several kingdoms, I think Austria is one of them, they're starting to put together, like, for the event, it kind of tells, it's a rubric that says, like, what does the event site look like? What are the facilities that are available? So that way folks can judge whether or not they could come out there and participate based on, various, challenges that they may have.
Right. No, it's interesting too, because, one of the, using mundane history here for a second, one of the court like explanation for the decision of Brown versus the Board of Education starts with the argument of assuming equal faculties, separating people on the concept of race doesn't make any sense, right? However, that phrase, assuming equal faculties, historically is not true. And what I mean by that is if we have a history of racism in this country, which we do, right, then Black folks relative to white folks have not had, equal facilities in terms of resources, political standing, so on, so on and so forth. In a patriarchal society, again, like the one that we have and we're currently operating in, then same rule and logic applies. We cannot expect that women have had the same equal access to things like sports, to things like relationship with their bodies, relationship to violence. That goes doubly so for queer people, right? For people who are non-binary, for people who are trans, right? There's a lot of things that we assume, like what Helga was saying, that when we default to that white cis masculine, right, that all of a sudden is frankly not true. And we miss all of those historical and cultural nuances that guide people towards and away from fighting, right? So that's something that we need to keep in mind as well.
Something that, I'll just bring up a little bit of theory here and talk about it in terms that have been explicitly used with regards to race, but Ibram X. Kendi in Being an Anti-Racist talks about ideas of assimilationists and segregationists, and the idea that all policy and all attitudes are either anti-racist or racist, right? Necessarily, right? That there is no neutrality. And to an extent, I think that's very true, right? I wouldn't even say to an extent, I'd say it's just true. The reality is that when a woman fights on the field, right, or someone who is not a heterosexual white male, right, they are inherently starting from a position where our society, historically, our culture has said that this is an area where they are inherently unequal by virtue of a set of behaviors that have perpetuated for thousands of years, right? And so when we start to pull these things apart in the journey towards trying to create a more equitable society, we are necessarily confronting, right, all of the things that made it that way, right? And so pulling those apart has to be done. We have to acknowledge that the people who are on the field are who they are, right? As Araya said, it's their identity, right? It is intrinsic to their experience of being violent. It is intrinsic to their experience of how to experience being a knight. It's intrinsic to what words mean, right? So the concept of chivalry, and I talked about before, the idea of the perception of inherent chauvinism in it, right? The perception of sexism. How are these things dealt with by different groups of people, and how do we interact with those things on the field, right? It is very easy for me to step onto the field as a white heterosexual male, right, and say, I'm a knight, right? I'm chivalrous. I am all of these things. I don't have any baggage associated with that, unless someone chooses to put, a negative connotation onto those words for me, right? I don't have to think about the fact that I'm 6'3" and 220 pounds, right, and capable of all the things that I'm capable of, right? Whereas another person in that situation must confront the realities that they experience stepping into that journey, right? Some women admittedly are athletes their entire lives, but the vast majority are not. And our culture steers people very specifically to certain modes of behavior, certain ways of reacting to stress. And if we don't acknowledge those, then we are not really dealing with the circumstances as they are. We're trying to
I wish there was a like button I could smash for that.
Yeah, and it perpetuates the problem, right? If we don't deal with it, so anyway.
Oh, that makes sense. Actually, you know what? I've been thinking about it. So we've kind of danced around the topic a little bit, but let's actually talk about our oath here, because we have, I believe, different oaths depending on which kingdom we're from. And how does this relate to the conversation that we're having, right? So, I mean, you could feel free to recite your oath or feel free to just talk about it, whatever you want. But where does the things that you are swearing here, the oath that you are making for life, because you only get a peerage largely once, and that's a permanent position, right? Um, so where does that fit in here, right? So if I may, you know, there's a bunch of things that I swear in my chivalric oath in the mid realm, right? Courteous at all times, shield of the weak, right? Reverent and generous, you know, obedient to my liege lord, which might present some possibility of higher conflict, maybe, perhaps. There's a lot of things that we swear to, and figuring out how do we apply this, I think, needs to be kind of the process, right? The striving of creating a more just society and the conscientious acknowledgement of the oath that we swear and the conscientious kind of process of making sure that we apply it strategically if we're looking for some social progress. What do folks think?
I don't always want to be the first one talking.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm so
I
awkward.
can assign people if you all want.
Oh no, it's fine.
I get
In the West, like our oath is actually the same. Unless we opt out, all the peerage oaths are the same. It is through the history of the West Kingdom. No, like white picket fence. All of our interpretations are slightly different. And it's like straight up the one pulled out of Tolkien. So, but you know, here do I swear by mouth and hand, and then you go to like fealty and service, in need or in plenty, in peace or in war, in living or in dying, from this hour henceforth, on on my honor and the lawful command of the crown, in need or in plenty, and and like you go through all this, to strike and despair, to do and to let be, to come and to go, and it's a simple oath, which gives us so much interpretation of it. I'd also like to note that I swore it 8 times in 3 years. Because I got my pal, I stepped up as princess, stepped down, and it literally is just like a series of events. So I have it very memorized. And in that oath for me, it means that no matter what, my job is to protect the populace and the crown. Sometimes it is protecting the populace from the crown. Sometimes it's protecting the crown from the populace. So it's making sure that I am standing there and supporting my king and queen and supporting the royalty of the kingdom, while also making sure the populace voice is heard, understood, and given a way that we can all communicate and come together. It's realistically, that's how we protect the SCA, is making sure that there's no abuses of power on both ways, because the mob mentality can go and does occasionally, and other times there's abuses when what we call silver poisoning happens. My job is to be the middle of that and to make sure I've got the tools and the group to handle it when it comes up, so everybody has a voice and we can continue to grow as a society.
Yeah, in my case, I was knighted on the battlefield at Gulf Wars with no warning, so there was no standard oath. I pulled it out of the air because I was like flabbergasted that it was happening, so I had no time to prepare. So I can't tell you exactly what my oath was, but I remember several of the pieces that were in it because they were always important to me, and I always make sure to say that. And one of them is being that bulwark, being the right arm of the crown, but that's not there forever. That's not unlimited. If the crown is screwed up, I've called out crowns to the point where the bod had to get involved because I stood up to the crown and said no. I mean, I've stood up and told the populace, you're not understanding the situation. We are the buffer between those two, I don't know, I'm not gonna call them polar opposites, but those two groups, those two entities. And it's our job to try and do our best to counsel both and help both sides understand where each other are coming from. And I don't know, I can't find the right word that's in my head, but that concept is very important to me. So I've made sure to have that in the oath that I swore.
It's interesting that one of the first lines of the mid-realm chivalry oath is, I hear so with fealty and do homage to the crown of the Middle Kingdom, to ever be a good knight and true. The question then is, what does it mean to be a good knight and true, right? And I think that falls on the ambiguity and the potential for rich interpretation, right? And what does that mean? I do think that it does mean being loyal to the populace and but also because we're a very royalistic, but also to the crown. Um, and I always remember think back to one of the few like overarchingly good characters in like the Game of Thrones series, Sir Davos Seaworth, the Onion Knight, the guy with the hand finger chopped off. Anyway, he has this really important line, I think, in the book series that he says, sometimes being loyal means telling somebody hard truths, right? Like loyalty isn't being a yes person. It's just saying like, listen, you are making a mistake, or like, hey, give them a break, or something to that extent of like loyalty means being able to look at the person in the face that you're being loyal to and admit the situation or give them the heads up of like, hey, if you do this, this is probably going to be read as this way. So that's something that we also need to keep in mind. Yeah. Justin, do you have any thoughts?
Well, so for me, right, we swear basically the same oath that the West does. Antir swears the oath that basically that Peregrine gave to Denethor in Return of the King, right? That's where it comes from. It's you know, it's slightly changed. We have a line about a good and true knight, ever chivalrous and courteous. And for me, right, I think that the good and true knight part is is sort of assumed in the sense that I swearing to be a bad and false knight, I suppose, would be sort of absurd, right? But the ever chivalrous and courteous, I think, is incredibly important, right? I think that we all have human failings, and our courtesy slips at times, but we should always be striving for that, right? We should always be striving to fulfill the ideals that we purport to hold. And so when I think about the oath, I think about those things, and I think about the interaction between the later lines and those lines, which is to say, like, to speak and to be silent, right? So if it is necessary for me to speak, I must do so, but I must also accept that there are times when I must listen, right? There are times when I must hear what is being told to me, right? There to strike and to spare. Again, we get into the concept of, not necessarily physical violence, but rhetorical and, appropriate violence for a situation, right? The idea to come and to go, right? To be present and to not be present as is necessary in a situation. Those sorts of things I think are very important to the idea of the oath, right? That it includes a set of duties that are aligned with the ideals that we purport to hold.
Gotcha. So then what do we do if, say, for example, if we are knights and one of our main jobs is to advise the crown? That's the main thing. Part one of being a knight is being out in the fighting field. Part two is making sure that the crown gets good advice. How do we incorporate the concept and the precepts of DEIB into the advice of the crown? Where do we place that? How do we keep that in mind? Where do we kind of figure that out if our crown comes to us and says, what do we do in this situation?
Oh,
While people think, oh,
yeah,
yeah,
no. I just, try and figure out who's going to go first is always an interesting.
Yeah, no, I was right. I'll start us off if that's okay. One of the things that DEIB focuses on, and a lot of people talk about, especially in like DEIB 101, shout out to Zara, is the idea of power inequality. Fundamentally, inequality in our society, marginalization, happens largely due to a difference and inequality of power. Power is a very nebulous term, but power in and of itself is one of the big core components. And how do we structure our society such that there results a power inequality, which results in, so on and so on and so on and so forth. One of the things that I personally am trying to be mindful of as I enter my life in as part of the chivalry is to be mindful of power inequality, right? Of whenever we whenever there's a new thing being proposed by the crown or society, or something is happening, right? And our crown wants us to wants our advice. One of the things that we need to keep in mind is, all right, who stands the most to gain, who stands the most to lose, who is benefiting, who is being harmed, and where's the power inequality? Because to a certain extent, we all buy into a certain level of power inequality because that's kind of the game, right? Like the kind of medieval-ish game that we play. But ultimately, the power inequality that we see in the SDA is not like the power inequality that we see in our larger society, in society writ large, right? Here, if somebody's a knight or a duke, or if somebody's not, doesn't have any titles because they're brand new, that doesn't mean that they're going to not have food or housing, or that their bodily autonomy is going to be legislated out of agency, right? That being said, mindfulness of that kind of larger systemic uh, uh, power inequality, I think, is going to be important. I don't know. What do people think here?
So I have a specific piece of advice that this feeds really nicely into. Having reigned twice, one of the most important things that I had was access to something that I now call a naismith, meaning someone whose job it is to tell me every idea that I had, why it's a bad idea. And this person has to be a good friend because they have to be able to tell you the truth. Because if I have an idea, I'm going to get just my own personality, I'm going to get excited about it. I'm going to be like, all right, this is great, let's do it. I needed somebody there who could be the brake to say, okay, here's the 8 reasons why I think this is a bad idea. Even if they personally think it's something that's a good thing to do in the long run, it's still their job, it's their role to tell me why it's a bad idea. Because at the end, even if the idea moves forward, I've now looked at it from those other perspectives. And if we move forward with it, it's going to be a better idea in the end because we're now taking that other information into account that I was blind to at the beginning. So whether or not if you're a royal, you need one. You need an A-Smith. Please get one. But we should all have that kind of person in our lives that is willing to call you out on your bullshit or to call you out on your bad ideas. Like Helga, like you said, your squire called you out. I love it. That was a lot of squires would not want to do that because they think that that's going to hurt their chances or their knight's going to get mad or whatever. But we all need that person in our lives who will call us on our crap and tell us when we're screwing up because none of us are infallible.
Mm-hmm.
I really like that idea of having a Smith. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Oh no, I am jacking that idea. So we kind of use that. So I'm gonna go at this from a different one, or kind of like a slightly different perspective. It is my job as a knight and the one with power to make sure I'm not applying my hero complex to a problem and taking away the voice of somebody that actually has the issue. It is my job to be the person that lifts them up and protects the space so their voice can be heard. I don't get to steal that from them. And that's actually as a knight, a duchess, and a pelican, it is my job to use that power to give them the platform to be able to speak to my crown. I don't if they feel safe enough, if I can help make sure they feel safe enough to go with that issue to the crown, it is my job to stand in the background, actually. And give them that space to present the idea and say, Your Majesty, I'm here as your representative and your peer to make sure they have space to talk to you about this, because this is an issue, but I can't take their voice. You need to hear it from the community. And that's something that I really try to work on, because all knights have hero complexes. So we want to go solve the problem and we want to go be that, I'll go do it for you. That is the worst thing. Yeah, it's the same thing with victim advocation. We cannot take and make a motion for a victim without their consent. It's the same
it's
thing.
It's called a white knight syndrome for a reason.
Yeah, it is. And I have that written on a sticky note that before, it was on a sticky note while I was reigning of, you cannot white knight this. You cannot abuse your power because you feel it is just. You must make sure the victim or the person bringing you the problem feels heard and safe and clearly understood before I take an action. It is my job as a knight to make sure that the crown also has that same opportunity and that person has the space to do it.
I think with regards to the position of people in authority in the SCA, which is to say us as knights, and also the two of you have both been crowns, and now I've been a baron for a while. I think the best thing that we can do is as Araya says, I think the thing that we can do is create space, right? We can define that these people are welcome. We can say it publicly. We can say it over and over and over, right? And make it known that we want those voices to be heard. We want this space to be made so that people whose perspectives are different than ours will be heard, right? That they can feel being seen, they can feel that they are welcome, right? That idea of belonging. I think that, if anything else, I guess rather even than, shield of the weak or something, right? Shield of space, the idea that we make, we protect an area that says, this is a place where you may talk. This is a place where you are welcome. This is a place where you belong, right? And your voices are valued, and, making sure to include those voices at that point as well. That not only do we make the space, but then we don't assume what they feel or assume what they want, but ensure that those people are involved.
Right, exactly. It's being able to build the table, to use a metaphor,
Yeah.
and to make sure that we have the proper chairs and say, you need to be part of this conversation. Please come in, right? And that's wonderful. So with that, what's interesting, I guess one of the things that we've been kind of talking about is still the idea of like DEIB or like chivalric oath and stuff like that. We all mentioned, like, I think all chivalric oaths, or at least the responses, are based on token, because this do we hear, never forget, and nor fail to reward, so on and so forth. It's very Denethor in Gondor kind of thing here in the Midrealm.
Yeah.
I'm curious though, where does these ideas and culture and like or kind of approaches to chivalry, where might that be limited by sort of a Western understanding of chivalry? And where can, for example, somebody who wants to be more chivalrous according to a non-Western persona, maybe an indigenous persona, maybe an African persona, maybe an Asian persona, where does that fit in, right? Where could we, um, where can we accommodate that? Because largely the SCA is biased towards European cultures, West Europe in particular, right? So where can we make space to accommodate different and world cultures understandings of chivalry? Where can we fit that in?
I mean, it should be fit in just right beside the Western European cultures. Full stop. I mean, every culture out there that I'm aware of has a warrior caste, has had a warrior caste. And the majority of them will have had a code of conduct for those warriors, because people realized if you don't, those warriors are just going to do whatever the hell they want. And you've got just barbarism. So the short answer is a samurai should be right next to a European knight, should be right next to anybody else, because they are all a part of the tapestry of human experience over 100,000 years or more, and all are worthy of the same level of honor and respect, because they're all part of who we are. Even if, I'm obviously very Caucasian, so I can't speak to the lived experience of someone who's, like, say, let's just say from Japan. I can't say that I know a ton about the samurai. Historically, I've studied Eastern martial arts a lot, but I'm not an expert in the area. But I will happily sit down with somebody who wants to recreate that code of conduct, because it's going to teach me something, because there's going to be things that they did that I undoubtedly I'm going to be like, wow, that's really cool. I like that concept because it frames it in a different way that I hadn't thought of before. So they should be sitting at the table right next to me.
Just jumping off that, 100% agree. And I'm going to say the human experience is relatively cut and paste through different societies. Like the codes of conduct, if you look at them, they're relatively the same. We just need to sit down and make space for them and actually understand that. Because again, the warrior classes were that with no controls. Oh, you got a bunch of dogs to bite. And so we as knights, and especially as Western European personas, need to make space and need to make loud space for it. And that's how I think that we can get better in the society about it, of being like, no, like this code of conduct, cool, come educate me. Agreed. Again, come educate me, but also like you have space. No, really, you have space to come educate me about this, because it might make the understanding of my oath even better. Like, let me make space for you. And when other people try to take away that space, be like,
right.
So
the the space is very important. So I think that, you know, dealing with cultures that are not our own is always potentially plagued with problems, right? In the sense that being inclusive includes educating yourself, right? And we can make horrible mistakes. I've seen you know, microaggressions, and I've seen, you know, mistakes that people have made in trying to be inclusive, right? The idea of there was an incident a few years ago about you know, someone being given a scroll for an Oriental persona. I shouldn't say Orientals, pardon me, an East Asian persona, that was very specifically done in a font that's I'm trying to remember the term. It's
Backhand is the word you're looking for.
Backhand. Thank you. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. That's it. Yes. And so, you know, that sort of thing is, you know, is problematic, right? And so the thing is that there's an education involved as well, right? So when we encounter someone who wants to examine and learn about these life ways that are not necessarily our own, we need to be prepared to engage with that, right, and become familiar with it. One of the things that there's a woman in my barony that is very much interested in researching her ancestral connection to the Mexica, the Aztec culture. And so one of the things that we've been, you know, very conscious of is she has chosen a name that that is appropriate for that culture. We've worked on making sure that we attempt to, when we're giving her awards, right? We've done things like the last award that I think we gave her was a chocolate cup, right? It's a cup for drinking cacao, right? And we made sure that it was decorated in an appropriate manner for a cacao cup from you know, the pre-colonial period, right? And you know, that sort of thing, really trying to embrace who she wants to be in the sense of her persona. And it's very much the same with, I think, when you're dealing with knights from other cultures. There are some differences. There are behaviors that we expect, right? Humans don't want to, as Araya was saying, it's to an extent cut and paste, in the sense that we generally want society not to be dominated by warriors, right, and completely controlled by them. At least that's the majority desire, which is why you see, you know, clergy and, you know, various other institutions attempting to mitigate the effect of warriors on society. And so, you know, we can expect courtesy to be part of it. We can expect ideas of fair play to be part of it. We can expect loyalty and honesty and these things to be upheld and cherished as virtues frequently in societies, right? At the same time, you know, you've got various outlying ideas. The Havamal, for example, praises cunning and the art of lying, right? You know, things like that. But at the same time, we don't want that to become what dominates our society. So we look at how to welcome people and how to learn about their cultures, and to understand them in their entirety, and you know, making space for that, I guess.
You know, I'm listening to y'all talk about this, and I'm coming back to this really cool, I guess, imagery, metaphor, depiction, vignette thing from a lot of disability advocates that they like to use, especially for mobility advocacy. To enter a building, you can have stairs that have wonderful guardrails and are accessible by most people that can walk. Or you can build ramps for people who are in wheelchairs or who are not as mobile. And not only are the people who are in wheelchair or not as mobile can use the ramp, but the people who can walk also can use the ramp. Meaning that the inclusion of different systems of access, that will not only benefit the people who are trying to get in, but also will benefit the people who are already able to get in anyway, right? There's a lot of sociological evidence that shows that, frankly, multiculturalism is a beneficial, messy, but beneficial way of establishing a society. Absolutely.
And that's why
But
the
keeping
concept
that
of the
idea,
patriarchy hurts everybody, even
right?
white cis males. They may not want to
Exactly.
admit it, but patriarchal concepts hurt everybody. So by eliminating those concepts, by making a more equitable society, you're making everybody's lives better.
Exactly. You know, the classic sort of patriarchal response, like, well, but it's men who go to war. I'm like, yeah, who built that system, right? So explicitly. So keeping that in mind, if we focus on establishing a society that is open and welcoming to different understandings of chivalry, to different understandings of propriety of behavior, all these things, we can net benefit not just everybody in society, but also the chivalry in general, right? So that's a really cool process. So yeah. So with that, folks, we're kind of nearing the end. It's the last 20 minutes of this panel. I We have two ways of kind of finishing out. We have one way of talking about incorporating DEIB processes in training, not just our dependents, but just the fighting community in general. Or B, we can talk about resources that people can use to develop themselves that they can incorporate. Or C, we can talk about both. What do people want to do?
Did we want to see if anybody had any questions?
That's I was
Great
about to
idea.
ask that too.
Sure. Are there any questions from the folks here? Yeah, we're here for y'all.
Also, I would like to note I have drank an entire pot of coffee doing this because I was so nervous.
Thank you all for being here and talking today. It is interesting to hear these kinds of perspectives, because those of us who are not of any import or are part of any order, we don't get to hear a lot of this.
Well, and that right there is a bit of a shame, because, like, I remember when I was coming up as a squire, we would have like campfire conversations around what is chivalry, what is franchise, what does it mean to be a knight. And I would hope that at the time I wasn't really focused on the other peerages because I was just out there having fun fighting. But I'd hope that every peerage would have those kind of conversations with their students one-on-one, but also in kind of the group mode, to explore these concepts and understand, because a one-on-one student-teacher relationship is wonderful, but sometimes the message doesn't get sent or received properly on that side. So hearing the same thing from somebody else can frequently give students perspective that they may not have had before. And I always, every time I teach anything, I always learn something myself. So it's not just a one-way street as far as where the knowledge is going.
Well, that sort of leads me to my point. I'm not a student, I'm not a teacher, I'm not a peer. I'm just a generic member of the populace who cares a lot about the game that we play. So I'm seeing a lot of this from the outside, and I don't know you folks. I know Justin a little bit. We've worked together before, and I have a few friends who are fighters. Not very many who are part of the chivalry. You guys are, to coin a phrase, the good guys. You folks are clearly invested in DEIB issues and clearly invested in your order and improving it. I would challenge you a little bit to say that you at least from outward appearances are the minority. And I think you all can agree that the order and knighthood as sort of the fighting community, as sort of a general catch-all, has some perception issues based on 50 plus years of sometimes really problematic history. And so my sort of discussion point to you is, you folks individually are clearly doing good things. You are clearly modeling good behavior. How do you feel that this is affecting knighthood and the fighting community in general? Is it working, essentially? And what is your strategy to keep it moving forward? Because those of us who are not in the fighting community or part of the order view you suspiciously. You guys are talking a good talk. I want to know where the walk is. And if you guys can talk more about the walk, I think getting that message out there is super important to the SCA as a whole.
Sure.
So this month is my 20th year in the SCA. So I've been fighting in the SCA for 20 years. I've been a member for 20 years.
That's adorable.
We would not have had this
myself.
conversation even 10 years ago. The fact that we're now having these conversations in the open, in public forums such as this, is evidence that we're making progress. I'm not saying that there isn't work to be done. There's undoubtedly work yet to be done, but we should all take heart. We should all be encouraged by the fact that we're having these conversations now, that people who didn't have voices 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, they wouldn't have felt at all comfortable talking about these kind of things. They just sucked it up and dealt with it, which that is not what we want nowadays. So continuing to have these conversations, having these forums, both large scale ones like this where everybody can come, and your small little local conversations, being that voice, that beacon of light, and showing the world that DEI is not this big scary thing. All it is trying to create a more equitable world and showing people what it looks like.
So I have the savage response here. I'm replacing them. This is where it's actually the truth here is, so sometimes we have to yeet family members. And in the Shiv, we are a pooled renown. Our reputation is not going to fix itself overnight. There is years and years of responses, but one of the things that we have to do as a society is give voice that, like, these are the changes that are happening and these are who we're addressing. But the thing is, I'm working to replace those knights, get their voice less, make sure their voice is lesser, make sure that they're out of problematic situations. But I'm replacing them by talking with my squires, by talking with the newer fighters that are coming in, by making sure the younger voices in our council have a heavier voice in that, and making sure that those voices are lifted up so our council is actually much more educated and much more willing to have these conversations. And when somebody's just like, oh, that's not really a problem, being like, actually it is. Here's the education. I'm going to need you to shut up until you actually go do it. And this is that I am definitely the who bullies the bully. We've established that today. But realistically, how we change the chivalry is by inviting the newer generations to be there and replacing the older generations that are not willing to adapt, and making it so they are so uncomfortable they don't come back.
Yeah, there's an explicit, I think one of the biggest issues, and I agree, Joshua, that one of the biggest issues is a problem of perception. There's a little bit of a PR problem. It's been 50 years of sexist bullshit. That, and to what Helga is saying, social change happens very slowly. We are not going to be able to handle this overnight. That being said, one of the things that happens, for example, I can confidently tell you that in the process of advising the Crown regarding potential candidates for the order, there has been an increased level of activity surrounding, yeah, sure, they can sing a stick good, but in the mid-realm, what we do is prowess only starts the conversation. If they're a really good fighter, but a terrible person otherwise, we're not going to talk about them. We're going to talk about them for 1 week. Everybody's going to say that they're terrible, and we're never going to talk about them again. So there's different levels here. So the criteria for who's going to be our next members of the order has increased. We're looking for people who are pillars of the community, but not just the white cis hetero community, right? So that's a particular consideration. On the lower level, on the grassroots level, for lack of a better term, out on the fighting field, for example, one of the things that I've seen a lot of members of the chivalry doing is legitimately discussing, hey, that blow is excessive. You don't need to treat them like that, right? Or having conversations about keeping things at a level of engagement, a low level of intensity where people don't feel discouraged or bullied out of the list field, right? There's this increased activity, maybe in the individual difficult to perceive parts, and there are also conversations happening behind the scenes, which is unfortunate because, the chivalry doesn't have a PR team, right? We're our own best messengers and our worst messengers. And that means that, when we do good things, it's hard for people to notice because they largely happen behind the scenes. But when things go bad, everybody is aware, right? And that's something that we need to keep in mind. And to what Helga is saying, ultimately the goal is to replace the people that we don't want, because you have largely failed in your oath and obligation if nobody feels safe around you. Period. End of sentence.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can't say that I disagree with with anything that's been said, especially the replace them part. The the reality is that the journey of the SCA is going through is very much the same journey that our society is going through culturally, right? And we exist in a patriarchal, heteronormative, racist, largely racist culture. And we must dedicate ourselves actively to not being that, right? To take the stance that if someone says something, that we will not tolerate it, right? That very explicitly, if I hear when I'm at practice, well, they need to hit harder because they're not using their body properly, they're a female fighter who doesn't hit hard enough, things like that. You just step in and say, well, that's if they need to learn something about body mechanics, that's fine, but are you sure you're not just being a dick, right? And I mean that, right? The extent to which we tolerate what should not be tolerated is something that we need to address. And to the extent that I can, the best way to do it is to simply devalue those voices, as Raya said, to replace them, to just simply not listen to them anymore. There are people who I know who have been racist, sexist, homophobic, all of these things, and you just don't tolerate it. It's that simple. There's really no other way to deal with it. You can, how you address it in the sense of whether you call them to task right away, in the moment is a little bit different, but generally you have to, right? You generally have to say, that's not an acceptable way of talking about this, or that is X, right? That is racist. That is, a homophobic statement to have made. That is inappropriate. We're not talking about those things in that way. And
when somebody tells you that it's a problem, don't just dismiss them out of hand. Listen to their concerns.
Yeah.
My favorite one that I continue to use this day is, so why is that funny?
Yeah.
And then just blank face.
Yeah, just wait.
Why is it? Why is it?
Yeah, why is that funny? Why is that what you just said that demeans like either myself or somebody I know or a race, religion, or culture? Funny. I'm gonna need you to explain it to me.
Yep. Step by step, please.
Make them uncomfortable. Also, I would like to say, this is actually some of the jobs of the knights, to make them uncomfortable. This cannot be put on the populace and cannot be put on the marginalized groups. In this, what we are talking about is knights level, knight and peer level work. And it is also the people that are, frankly passing or within that larger group. So white AF, like it is my job to step into that role a lot harder and a lot faster than somebody that's in the marginalized community, because we need to make sure that they feel safe enough to step forward. Guess what? I just get to.
Right. Exactly. It's, being explicit about it, being deliberate, and frankly, like peers are selected because they are perceived as stewards of the society. This is part of the job, right? And it's slow work, unfortunately, but society moves very slowly. And we're all doing every bit that we can. That being said, we need to keep going. That's the job we took. That's the oath we swore. So here we are.
Well, it is part of my job to tell you you have reached time.
Okay.
We still have like 5 minutes. Come on.
No, we're supposed to give 5 minutes between classes.
Yeah,
Okay.
technically I've got another panel, so.
Yeah, no, Justin and I are another panel, so thank you very much for
Now,
the time.
if you want to continue the conversation, people can move into one of the breakout rooms to continue the conversation, but there is another class coming in.
Sure. Well, I need to get going because I have another class. I'm sure Justin as well. That being said, I really appreciate the fact that all of y'all were here. Thank you very much for coming. The chat section was fantastic to observe. I really want to thank Sir Justin, Sir Hrafna, and Sir Helga for being here and taking their time and energy to deal with these conversations, because they can be very tough and emotionally draining. So thank you very much for your wise counsel. I personally learned a lot. So I wanted to say thank you on my behalf and also on the behalf of everybody here that attended. So thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you guys for making this happen.
Thank you for allowing me to participate.
Yeah. All right, folks, I'm gonna get going. Talk to y'all later. Take care.
So the next question is, how do I get to room 2?
You bounce back to the
me-
main room and ask.
There it
or,
is.
Or if you can go to the breakout, if there's a breakout rooms option at the bottom of the screen, you can click on that icon and pick another room.
Wait, which class are you in so I can go stalk you?
The anti-racist panel.
Oh shit, I'm going to that one.
Just
Yeah.
a quick note, the moderators also sent an announcement across the platform that they're going to close all the breakout rooms and reopen them at noon. And everybody should be able to assign themselves to classes after that, or to rooms after that.
Great.
Okay, cool. Leave her.
And then you'll send us to our rooms.
You'll be able to send yourself